Alright, what the fuck did I just watch? There is a possibility that if viewed as a standalone film in a bubble, when no other Star Wars film exists, that Rise of Skywalker could be mostly fine. It could be a totally serviceable, average blockbuster that comes and goes and is forgotten by next summer. Unfortunately for Rise of Skywalker, that is not the case. Once you remember that this is the 9th film in a franchise, that it is supposed to provide closure on the 42 years of build-up, Rise of Skywalker is an abomination. Given that J.J. Abrams directed The Force Awakens, which was then followed by Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi, where he famously binned all of J.J.'s plans as to where the story could go, it is quite clear that in Rise of Skywalker, J.J. was trying to steer the trilogy desperately back in the direction he originally envisioned. I will acknowledge that J.J. was given pretty much an impossible task to follow on from The Last Jedi, but that is very little in the way of consolation when Rise of Skywalker is as bad as it is. I do think that if J.J. didn't have to acknowledge or follow on from The Last Jedi, that Rise of Skywalker could have been significantly better. And in fact, it would almost be possible to watch The Force Awakens and then follow it immediately with Rise of Skywalker, if not for the curious absence of a certain character called Luke Skywalker. You may have heard of him. You could describe the sequel trilogy as a cancerous growth that attached itself to the original trilogy and then proceeded to leech it of everything that made it good. And if we continue with that analogy, Rise of Skywalker is like the cancerous growth attached to the cancerous growth. There is no way I'm going to be able to cover every problem with this movie after watching it only once, but I will do what I can, so let's go. As you may know, J.J. Abrams set up a bunch of mystery boxes in the first film of the sequel trilogy, The Force Awakens. These included: who are Rey's parents? Who is Supreme Leader Snoke? Who are the Knights of Ren? Why did Luke Skywalker go into hiding? How did Maz Kanata obtain Luke's lightsaber from Cloud City? How did the First Order obtain power after the defeat of the Empire? What did Snoke mean when he told Kylo to return and complete his training? Will Finn recover from his injuries? And as you will know, in what has become something of a meme, rather than giving any kind of satisfying answer to any of these questions, Rian Johnson subverted our expectations on every single point with The Last Jedi. Rey's parents? They're no one. She is inexplicably powerful for no reason. Supreme Leader Snoke is no one. He's inexplicably powerful and we have no idea who he is. The Knights of Ren? Who are they? Luke Skywalker went into hiding because he felt ashamed after he tried to murder his nephew in his sleep. The First Order? They're just inexplicably powerful for no reason. Kylo's training? Well, all he had to do was kill Rey. Finn's injuries? What injuries? So anyway, now with JJ back in charge, he was able to try his best to steer the sequel trilogy back in the direction it was headed before Rian Johnson used his weird circular brain to steer the franchise off a cliff. So here's what JJ did with Rian's answers to JJ's two biggest questions. Rey's parents are indeed no one, but her grandfather was Palpatine. Yep, that Palpatine, the one who's been dead for 30 years. Snoke? Not only is he no one, but he was literally created by Palpatine in a test tube in order to create the First Order and train Kylo. Why couldn't Palpatine have done this himself? Fuck you, that's why. Anyway, so as we learn in the opening minutes, Palpatine is in fact alive. There are two ways, as far as I can tell, that this is possible, and both are just as retarded as each other. First possibility is that Palpatine's body physically survived being dropped down the shaft on the Death Star moments before it blew up, and he was then able to escape through the vacuum of space to safety, presumably in a similar fashion to the now infamous Leia Poppins scene in The Last Jedi. Possibility number two is that the Palpatine that Vader and Luke defeated in Return of the Jedi was in fact a clone of the real Palpatine. This is actually hinted at being what actually happens in Rise of Skywalker with a throwaway line mentioning that cloning is something only the Sith know how to do, or something to that effect. And this would of course mean that Luke's heroism and Vader's redemption at the end of Return of the Jedi were absolutely meaningless because all they accomplished was killing an inconsequential clone of the real thing. But if you were honestly expecting this trilogy to end with any amount of respect or reverence for the originals, then you haven't been paying attention. Anyway, so Palpatine has been hiding on Evil Planet for presumably 30 years and has somehow amassed a secret fleet of Star Destroyers, all equipped with planet-killing Death Star technology. And when I say fleet, I mean a fleet larger than any fleet in the history of Star Wars. We see thousands of Star Destroyers. Where did Palpatine get enough people to man these ships? But hey, it looks cool, so don't think about it. We then meet the three protagonists from the sequel trilogy, Rey, Finn, and Poe. Rey and Poe enjoy their first on-screen conversation in the final film of the trilogy. They learn about Palpatine and his fleet from information sent to them by a First Order mole. Rey then discovers information that Luke left behind that will lead her to a MacGuffin that will lead her to Palpatine. Because, of course, it ain't a Star Wars film without a MacGuffin. Meanwhile, Kylo is able to track where Rey is using the Force. This is something that was kinda set up in The Last Jedi, but here it's used in a completely different way and for completely different reasons. So in The Last Jedi, Rey and Kylo are able to have these Force Skype calls where they can speak to each other, see each other's surroundings, and interact in an extremely limited fashion. Like raindrops from one end appear on the other person's hand, for example. It is later revealed in The Last Jedi that Snoke, the most powerful Force user in the entire series, apart from Palpatine it seems, was manipulating these Force Skype calls for reasons that were relevant to the plot of that movie. My point is, it wasn't Kylo or Rey that were doing it. Kylo even says at one point,
"You're not doing this. The effort would kill you."
Rey is more powerful than Kylo, and he knows this. Kylo also understands that the amount of power it would take to do something like this would be enough to kill her. So, how is this connection used in Rise of Skywalker? Well, Rey and Kylo are able to communicate with each other without requiring Snoke's influence. They are also able to transport objects to each other through the Force. Kylo grabs Rey's necklace in one scene, and Rey sends Kylo a lightsaber in another. I'll say that again. Rey uses the Force to make her lightsaber disappear and then reappear in Kylo's hands. I know that I can't really say that this would be impossible because, the Force is essentially magic, but magic still has rules. We are given absolutely no reason as to why they are able to do this. We are given no reason as to why they didn't do this until now. We are given no reason as to why no one else has ever been able to do this. So I can't really call it a plot hole, but I can call it a Deus Ex Machina. So anyway, Finn, Rey, and Poe travel to yet another desert planet looking for this MacGuffin. They are chased by stormtroopers with jetpacks. They, for some reason, are surprised that the stormtroopers have jetpacks when jetpacks have existed in Star Wars since forever. And then they accidentally fall down a hole, accidentally find the remains of a ship inside the hole, and accidentally find a Sith dagger inside that ship. So the dagger ends up acting as an intermediary MacGuffin that leads them to the actual MacGuffin, but before I go there, I should reiterate that they literally stumbled upon the exact object that they needed to complete their mission. They weren't even looking for a Sith dagger. They happened to find one in the hole that they accidentally fell in. And if that wasn't enough of a convenience, it's later revealed that not only is this dagger the MacGuffin that will lead them to the other MacGuffin, it is also the exact same dagger that was used to kill Rey's parents. Is this impossible? No. So I can't call it a plot hole, but I can call it a gigantic plot contrivance. So anyway, this Sith dagger is inscribed with a Sith text, which they assume will lead them to the MacGuffin that will lead them to Palpatine. I honestly can't remember why they assume this, but I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that that just isn't explained. Luckily, they have C-3PO with them, who is a translator. He is a protocol droid literally built to translate one language into another. Except he can't this time because the script says so. Yeah, so the only reason this was written into the script was to pad the runtime, to necessitate taking the heroes to yet another planet, and to tease the idea that C-3PO would have his memory wiped with the goal of evoking some emotion.
What are you doing there, 3PO?
Taking one last look, sir, at my friends.
Instead of feeling any kind of sadness that C-3PO would essentially be killed, I was more wondering why he referred to Finn, Poe, and Rey as his friends, when they've only said like one or two lines to each other. They're friends because the script says so, I guess. And I'm kind of glad that this scene didn't work in the slightest, because if I had got emotionally invested, I would have been even more pissed off when, shortly after, R2-D2 uploads a memory backup into C-3PO, which means that this was really just a cheap attempt at baiting this character's death. So, when I bought my ticket to see Rise of Skywalker, I honestly was expecting that I would find the movie funny, either unintentionally or intentionally. I didn't really care. As long as the film made me laugh, I'd consider myself entertained. Rise of Skywalker failed to do this through the entirety of its runtime, with one exception. One moment in this movie broke me, and I had to restrain myself. So Finn and Poe are captured by stormtroopers and are then ordered to be executed. While standing in front of a firing squad, all hope seems lost. At least it would, if not for the tonal inconsistency that results from them exchanging jokes when they're about to die. And then they are rescued by the First Order mole. Remember, the mole who leaked information about Palpatine to the Resistance at the start of the movie. The mole is General Hux. So, for those of you who might not understand why this is self-evidently fucking retarded, let me explain. General Hux was a subordinate only to Supreme Leader Snoke. He was in charge of the entire First Order military. He uses the Starkiller base to destroy 5 planets, killing untold billions of innocent people. From what we see on screen, Hux has the highest body count of any character in the entire saga. Hux isn't a grunt, so this isn't at all comparable to Finn, for example, when Finn deserted the First Order at the start of The Force Awakens. To use a Lord of the Rings analogy, this would instead be like Saruman revealing at the start of Return of the King, after having killed thousands of people at the Battle of Helm's Deep, that he is in fact working for the good guys and wants to help take down Sauron. This moment absolutely broke me because it demonstrated a total disregard for and lack of understanding of the characters that J.J. Abrams himself had created. And the way this information is revealed is so hilariously blunt. Hux just shoots the firing squad in the back and declares, "I'm the mole." And they try to explain this with a throwaway line. Poe asks Hux why he's helping them, and Hux then replies, "I don't care if you win. I only care if Kylo Ren loses." Yeah, that sounds about right. This man has murdered billions of people, and he decides to commit treason, likely knowing that it will cost him his own life, in order to make it marginally more likely that Kylo Ren will lose. In The Force Awakens, we see that Kylo and Hux are both subordinates to Snoke, but they appear to be of a similar rank. Kylo, of course, being more physically powerful, but Hux being the military commander and tactician, which is a similar dynamic to Tarkin and Vader in the original Star Wars. There is a sense of rivalry between Kylo and Hux in The Force Awakens, but nothing overt. In The Last Jedi, Hux is suddenly treated like a punchline by both Rian Johnson and Kylo Ren. But even though we really have no choice but to accept The Last Jedi as canonical at this point, the suggestion that being thrown into walls a couple of times by Kylo would be enough motivation for Hux to turn traitor is insulting. So anyway, after escaping thanks to Hux Ex Machina, Rey, Finn, and Poe travel to Endor and find the remains of the second Death Star. I could have sworn I saw it explode at the end of Return of the Jedi, but hey, it looks cool, so don't think about it. Rey finds the MacGuffin, Kylo then shows up and destroys it, which leads, predictably, to a lightsaber duel. Oh boy, I am on the edge of my seat. Rey has fought and beaten Kylo already, and that was before she had any training at all. I wonder if she will make it 2 for 2. Yeah, she does. She stabs Kylo in the chest with his own lightsaber. Also, Leia dies. Yeah, so the way I phrased that was about as jarring as it was in the movie. This was an extremely weird scene. Kylo actually manages to beat Rey, but Leia, armed with the power of perfect timing, manages to speak to Kylo from another planet using the Force long enough to distract him, which is when Rey then stabs him. Leia dies, somehow, and Rey senses this, somehow, and heals Kylo, somehow, out of remorse? So before I move on to the force healing thing that this movie just shat out of nowhere, I do not understand how Leia died. Am I dumb, or is the movie just being deliberately vague? So the way I see it, either Leia was already dying from some kind of unspecified illness, and then she finally died as a result of the effort needed to communicate with Kylo, or she was perfectly healthy and then sacrificed herself in order to communicate with Kylo to save Rey. Or Leia died as a result of Rey stabbing Kylo because Leia was communicating with Kylo at that point in time. Either way, Rey senses that Leia has died immediately when it happens. And because she feels guilty about killing Leia's son, she decides to heal him. Yeah, so Rey is suddenly able to heal wounds using the Force. We have never seen anything like this before, so did she just figure this out by herself? How did she learn this? Fuck you, that's how. The film later reveals that Kylo apparently also knows how to do this, and so does Palpatine? So that means that 3 characters who have appeared in multiple movies prior to this one are suddenly all able to use the Force to do something as of yet unprecedented and unexplained, but extremely useful? Again, this isn't impossible, so I can't really call it a plot hole, but I can call it another gigantic plot contrivance. So after learning from Kylo that she is Palpatine's granddaughter, Rey exiles herself on the same planet Luke exiled himself on previously. She tries to destroy his lightsaber that he had given her, but is prevented from doing so when the Force ghost of Luke Skywalker catches the lightsaber in midair. So this is one of 2 moments I noticed when Rise of Skywalker was stuck in a catch-22. The Last Jedi tore a gaping hole in the established world building from previous Star Wars films by revealing that Force ghosts can interact with the physical world. Whilst there is nothing inherently wrong with this idea, who am I to say what a Force ghost can or cannot do? But the problem is that in the 7 movies that came out before The Last Jedi, every single time a character is in peril or is killed, we will be asking ourselves, why isn't there a Force ghost here to help them? If dead Jedi are able to physically interact with the world around them, this would give them an extreme advantage over anyone who is still alive. And apparently they can just show up whenever they want. Anyway, in Rise of Skywalker, the Force ghost of Luke Skywalker catches the lightsaber and proceeds to use the Force to lift his X-Wing out of the water. So I will admit that I did like this scene, in spite of it perpetuating the world-breaking continuity established in The Last Jedi. And this is really what I mean by a catch-22. If Rise of Skywalker acknowledges that Force ghosts can interact with the physical world, then it's consistent with The Last Jedi, but inconsistent with the 7 movies that came first. And if Rise of Skywalker had ignored this and had instead treated Force ghosts as, Force ghosts, then it would have been inconsistent with the movie it is supposed to be a direct sequel to. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. But to be clear, this is entirely Rian Johnson's fault because JJ was kind of fucked either way. Kylo, meanwhile, has a vision of his father, Han Solo, who is thankfully not depicted as a Force ghost, but more as a hallucination. And after a heart-to-heart, he abandons the Kylo Ren identity and becomes Ben Solo once again. This seemed remarkably easy for him to do, given that 5 minutes earlier he was planning on using Rey to defeat Palpatine so they could rule the galaxy together. But Kylo Ren is such a comically inconsistent character that with all his flip-flopping, he was eventually going to flop on one side or the other. So I can't really call it a plot hole, but I can call it lazy writing. So Rey arrives on Evil Planet to fight Palpatine, and she then transmits the location of the planet to the Resistance. Before the Resistance attacks, one pilot asks, why don't we use a Holdo maneuver? And another responds with, come on, that was a 1 in a million. So this brings me to my second catch-22 that Rise of Skywalker finds itself in as a result of The Last Jedi. In The Last Jedi, Admiral Holdo is able to destroy the Supremacy as well as a fleet of Star Destroyers by piloting the Raddus through them at light speed, which tears them to pieces. Now, as with Force Ghosts, I'm not going to pretend that I'm an authority on whether or not this kind of light speed ramming maneuver could actually work, but the cool thing is that I don't have to. The Last Jedi showed us that it does, in fact, work. Never mind the previous 7 movies filled with Star Destroyers, Death Stars, and Starkiller bases, in which not one single pilot even suggested piloting a ship into them at light speed. The problem with this, if I have not already made it clear, is that until The Last Jedi, this was never an option. This was never mentioned, and it was never proposed or stated that it would or could work. Then The Last Jedi shows us that yes, you can in fact destroy a fleet of gigantic enemy ships simply by aiming a smaller ship at them and jumping into hyperspace. As with the Force Ghosts, thanks to Rian Johnson, we now find ourselves asking in all 7 previous films, as well as in Rise of Skywalker, why no one is lightspeed ramming each other when it has proven to be extremely effective and simple to do. So when the Resistance pilot asks, why don't we do a Holdo maneuver, Rise of Skywalker is acknowledging that the audience is probably asking the same question. And unfortunately, the only reason as to why they don't try a Holdo maneuver, we are told, is because it was a 1 in a million. It wasn't. All she did was turn the Raddus towards the Supremacy and press the go button. It's not rocket science. Oh, wait. So as a result of Rian Johnson's addition to the Star Wars canon, JJ had to come up with a reason as to why the Resistance couldn't simply use a droid to hyperspeed one or multiple ships through Palpatine's entire fleet. And JJ couldn't do it. Because there is no reason as to why they can't do this. And this is one of the reasons why people say Rian Johnson killed Star Wars. So, during the battle, the Resistance gets mostly destroyed. They are pretty much back down to the 10 or so people that were alive at the end of The Last Jedi. And then, suddenly, thousands of ships show up to help. So we are expected to believe that thousands of ships from an unspecified number of planets showed up here at this big battle to help the Resistance, which at this point in time consists of maybe 20 ships. What makes this especially hard to believe is that this is taking place only 1 year after the ending of The Last Jedi, when in a similar situation, not one single planet responded to their distress call. Again, this isn't impossible, so I can't really call it a plot hole, but I can call it... Actually, you know what, I am going to call this one a plot hole. We are given absolutely no reason and no explanation as to how or why these people would just show up here to fight against Palpatine. Just because it would be physically possible for a bunch of people to get in their ships and fly here doesn't make it not a plot hole. Then a large number of Resistance members, including Poe and Finn, land on top of one of the Star Destroyers in atmosphere and ride across it on horses so they can destroy a beacon on its exterior. At this point, I was kind of wondering why the Star Destroyer didn't just fly away, which is, it's what Star Destroyers do. This, of course, would have resulted in the remaining Resistance members falling to their deaths, but hey, it looks cool, so don't think about it. We then see Kylo and Rey confront Palpatine. Palpatine drains the life out of both of them using the Force, which for some reason doesn't actually kill either of them, but anyway. Then Palpatine uses lightning to attack the Resistance fleet, instead of using it to kill Rey or Kylo, who are lying on the floor right in front of him. And you might be thinking, well, an entire fleet of thousands of ships pose a greater threat to him than 2 defeated Force users. And to that I say, no. We are told that Palpatine's master plan was to grow a Supreme Leader Snoke, to use this Snoke to create the First Order and turn Kylo Ren to the dark side. Concurrently, he also planned to have his own granddaughter killed to remove a potential threat. This failed, and she grew up and became a Jedi, so Palpatine then instructed Kylo to kill Rey for him. This failed, and Kylo betrayed Palpatine and teamed up with Rey to fight him. They failed to do this, he drained their life force out of them, which left them incapacitated and defenseless right in front of him. I do not think it reasonable to suggest that Palpatine would have prioritized shooting lightning at the Resistance fleet before finishing off Rey and Kylo. But hey, it looks cool, so don't think about it. Rey then hears voices in her head of various Jedi that had died previously, including Luke, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin, and she then stands up to fight Palpatine. Palpatine attacks her with lightning, and Rey deflects it back at him with a lightsaber, killing him. Well, that was remarkably easy. And I almost forgot to mention the best part. They rip off Endgame. Spoilers for Endgame. If you're the one guy who hasn't seen this yet, then skip to this point in the video. So at the climax of Endgame, when all hope is lost, Thanos says,
I am inevitable.
To which Iron Man responds,
I am Iron Man.
before he saves the day. In Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine says, I am all the Sith. And Rey responds with, and I am all the Jedi. You might be thinking this is a bit of a stretch, so I'll elaborate on why I think this is a blatant ripoff. The dialogue from the emotional climax of Endgame is virtually identical to that in Rise of Skywalker. This dialogue occurs immediately before the hero defeats the villain and then dies as a result. Endgame is the most successful movie of all time and was the culmination of a decade-long series of movies, much like what Rise of Skywalker is trying to be. The ending of Endgame was extremely emotionally impactful, much like what Rise of Skywalker is trying to be. To be honest, if Rise of Skywalker was a good movie, then I would probably just chalk this down to coincidence. But given how terrible the rest of the movie is, how clearly desperate Disney are, and to be honest at this point how cynical I am, I really think that to call this a coincidence would be naive. So then we get a scene that was, interesting. Having defeated Palpatine single-handedly, having accomplished what Vader and Luke apparently failed to do 30 years previously, because of some good old-fashioned retroactive continuity, having removed any impact that Anakin Skywalker's redemption and sacrifice had previously had, Rey dies. Not for long, though, because Kylo apparently also knows how to use the Force to heal people suddenly, and he heals her. Then they kiss. You heard me. They kiss. To say this came out of nowhere is kind of an understatement. The only, and I mean only, setup for this was in The Last Jedi, when during one of their Force Skype calls, courtesy of Snoke, Kylo is shirtless and Rey is repulsed by him. And that was a year prior to this movie. A few hours ago, Rey wanted Kylo dead, and for good reason. Now they are not only fighting on the same side, but they are apparently romantically involved. Not for long though, because then Kylo dies. For real this time. Rey apparently can't force heal him. Why? Fuck you, that's why. So that pretty much brings us to the end of the movie. But wait, I hear you ask, what's with the title? What does Rise of Skywalker even mean? Well, at the very end of the movie, Rey visits Luke's home from A New Hope and declares to a local that she is Rey Skywalker. So, either she was just pretending to be someone that she isn't so that this woman will leave her alone, or something symbolism something. As you can probably tell, my guess is the latter. So that is the end of Rise of Skywalker. Although I have highlighted more than a few reasons as to why this movie is terrible, I have no doubt missed a lot. I could make entire videos dedicated to all the characters that are just kind of there for no reason other than that they appeared in the previous movies, or all the times that characters either forget things that they should know, or they have knowledge that they couldn't possibly have, depending on what the script says. Or I could make a video covering all the questions that the sequel trilogy leaves totally unanswered. For now, though, I'll leave you with this final thought. I have seen every Star Wars film released since I was born in the cinema. I watched the prequels as a kid. I watched The Force Awakens on opening night, and again a few days later, and I loved it. I watched Rogue One also on opening night, and I was slightly less enthused, but still entertained. I had high hopes going into The Last Jedi on opening night, because at that point in time I was still very much on The Force Awakens bandwagon, but we all know how The Last Jedi turned out. I didn't see Solo in cinemas, because honestly, who the fuck did? Anyway, the reason I'm mentioning all of this is because I realized when watching the title crawl for Rise of Skywalker that this was the first time in my life when I honestly did not care about what I was about to see. I was not excited. I only watched the movie out of morbid curiosity. I wanted to see it through to the end so that I could let it die. The excitement I had felt the previous 5 times I had seen the Star Wars opening crawl in the cinema had been replaced by apathy. When making The Force Awakens, JJ's mantra may well have been, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." As has been made clear by Rise of Skywalker following on from The Last Jedi, the sequel trilogy will now only serve as a reminder that sometimes if something is broke, you can't fix it. Thank you so much for checking out my review. If you do agree or disagree with me, definitely let me know in the comments. If you did enjoy this video, please consider liking, sharing, or subscribing, as it will help me do more videos like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.